Today's episode is sponsored by Ellie, Ellii.
Ellie is one of the world's leading content libraries for English language teachers, with thousands of ready-made lessons and flashcards and hundreds of videos that you can use to complement your own curriculum or use as your main source of materials.
Ellie is run by a team of former English teachers, dedicated to creating content that engages your language learners.
If you're an independent teacher or paying for your materials out of pocket, we invite you to use our podcast's exclusive discount code Think-Aloud to save 15% off your first membership term. That's THINKALOUD.
And if you're an administrator looking to buy for your whole program, just reach out to the fine folks at Ellie to inquire about a 2-month free trial to test it out for your organization. And don't forget to mention who sent you, your friends at the Teacher Think-Aloud Podcast.
Head to ellie.com today. That's ELLII.com. Hello and welcome to the Teacher Think-Aloud Podcast, a podcast for reflective practice for teachers of English around the world. I'm your co-host, Anna.
And I'm Shé.
And today we're revisiting a topic we haven't really touched on in a while, building rapport in the classroom.
You may remember one of our early episodes, episode 7, Building Rapport on Day 1. We covered a lot of ground there and talked about some of our favorite techniques for setting the tone in our classrooms.
So long ago.
Yeah, oh my gosh.
But this time we're coming at it with a twist, thinking retrospectively about what we learned when we all transitioned to online teaching 5 years ago.
5 years ago. It's wild.
Yes, 5 years ago. And in that time, we've learned so many ways to create engagement and connection in online settings. Our guest today, Bob Nguyen, has a lot to share on his favorite tech tools, but most importantly, the pedagogy behind building rapport in online settings. Let's hear about Bob's background.
My name is Bob Nguyen. I'm a recovering computer nerd who happened to find English language teaching, and now I'm integrating technology and innovative classroom teaching into my inclusive, engaging classes. So right now I'm teaching ESL at Saddleback Community College. I just started there. That's in Mission Viejo, California, and it's part of the North Orange County Community College district. And for the last 5 years before that, I was teaching in Turkey, in Adana and Izmir with the English language program. At first, I was teaching English language teaching department. So this was like pre-service teachers who were studying to become English language teachers at K through 12 in Turkey. And then afterwards, I was teaching at a prep department, which was like preparing the students to go into their departments. I was also doing teacher trainings. I was part of the continuous professional development unit there, just creating things that I felt and teachers felt like they needed to kind of expand and create more communicative classes.
We wanted to plunge right into our topic with Bob. So our surprise icebreaker question really targeted this idea of creating connection.
Kind of related to the direction that we're going in today. What is your go-to small talk topic?
Ooh, small talk. Okay. I mean, I guess I always, the thing I'm going to talk about is like this idea of high disclosure. High disclosure just means if I tell you something like kind of deep and personal, you're going to listen and you're going to actually share something equal unless you run away, which always is my good way of getting out of small talk because I don't really enjoy small talk. I like to get to the point. I think I always like to talk about my hobbies. And so a lot of it would be like, depending on who it is, I would talk about cooking. I feel like, especially with our demographics and the people I love to talk to, I want to know about the foods that they eat, the different cultures. I think traveling has always been learning about the different cuisines, ways that people cook, what food means, like how people get together, share meals or not share meals. And so I think, for me, the small talk that I think gets everyone on some level is talking about food.
Everyone
Lovely.
loves food. Yeah.
Everyone loves food.
Yeah.
Well, and
and I like
I-
that you're like, well, I just want to go deep. So,
I wanna-
yeah.
I
mean,
hate small talk. I hate
Well,
it.
and from that, you talk about like who cooked in your family, and you can talk about like your relationship with your mom or whoever the caretaker was that provided food.
I love that Bob just went straight into the idea of high disclosure.
Hmm.
Just skip the small talk, please, and let's get deep with people. Oh, I love that.
Right. Yeah. And I Googled high disclosure after our interview. And
Mm,
according to a summary of research I read, in the field of psychology, self-disclosure is considered really central to building and maintaining intimate relationships and trust. So
mm,
it's interesting to see it used in the context of relationship building in the classroom.
mhm,
One thing that comes up in the research is the concept of appropriateness. The
mm.
self-disclosure needs to match the level of familiarity between individuals. AKA, too much disclosure can feel inappropriate. So
Yikes.
going deep needs to be somewhat calculated. You don't want to freak someone out, essentially.
Makes sense. Makes sense.
Hmm.
And this really connects to what Bob will be telling us about today. Let's hear his thoughts on building rapport with students online.
You've spent a lot of time thinking about how to make online learning more engaging. So why don't you tell us a little bit about the circumstances that led you to rethink how to engage students online?
Yeah, so I was teaching in Turkey in Adana in 2019. This was when I just started as an English language fellow. I was
Hmm.
at a university. I was teaching all these language skills classes, speaking, listening, writing. The first year classes, they were learning the skills, improving their skills in order to become better teachers. At the time, I was concerned because there were students that were very shy, and I kind of questioned whether or not they would make it in the classroom. And the more I
Mhm,
researched it and the more I started looking at learning profiles, I started to really connect with my introverted students and kind of realizing that I was that introverted student in high school and junior high school, that I
mm,
knew the answers. I just didn't want to raise my hand. I was waiting for the teacher to call on me, or I was just kind of
Mm.
high-fiving myself in my head, just like,
mm,
yeah, you got it. And so, yeah, thinking about ways that I would be able to kind of connect with them in person. And then, the pandemic came around. So we went online, and that was a really hard year. I had to
Yeah.
move back to the United States. And so, yeah, I mean, I remember I wanted to record a video of myself in my quarantine home. One of our family friends allowed me to like stay in this place for free, and it was freezing, and it was like the middle of March, no heating. But I remember recording this video in the 6th week of class and just telling them what happened, where I was, kind of showed my life. And that kind of started this idea of like, how do I connect to my students now? Like before it
Mm.
was in person. And part of it was that I wanted to share my context, where I was living, how I was kind of dealing with transitioning to online.
I'm sure that COVID-19 experience resonates with a lot of people.
Hmm.
One day we were teaching in person, and the next we were teaching from a basement.
I remember one time I led a webinar from my bathroom floor with the computer balanced on the toilet because it was the only quiet place in the house.
I remember you telling me about that.
Hmm.
Hey, whatever works, right?
Yeah.
But besides the logistics of teaching online, so many of us at that time really struggled to figure out how to maintain connection in a digital space.
Bob made a really good point about wanting to show his COVID space as a way of being vulnerable, letting students into his life to model authenticity so that they would be open and receptive to interaction and community building.
Mm-hmm.
That vulnerability, I think, means a lot to students. Like, this is a person in front of me, not just a teacher. And I can
Hmm.
be myself in this space too.
Yeah, no robo teacher, right?
Hmm.
Simply being who we are means a lot. And Bob's come a really long way since that time in his friend's basement. One thing we noticed in our conversation with him is that he has a really professional looking setup with nice headphones, a great mic, good lighting.
Hmm.
It really looks very professional. Nice job, Bob.
Yeah. And the origin of that setup is really interesting.
And at that time, I was like following all of these YouTubers, these people that were recording videos for Twitch. Those were the people that were actually teaching us how to use our computers to do Zoom
Mm.
calls. They were giving me
Mm-hmm.
recommendations on microphones, on which camera I should be using.
Ah,
So,
interesting.
so my whole setup was inspired by people playing video games online for money.
Cool.
And I think part of it is like, if we're going to talk about what I call the simulacrum of the real world and the online world, like that same thing is like, you're wearing a nice suit today. Like, oh, you got a fresh haircut, like in person. Those kind of things that we have to do as teachers. So, like being prompt, dressing nicely. I mean, from the waist up, I mean.
That's so true.
And our backgrounds, right? Like, that's how we represent ourselves. And if it's whether it's like a fake bookstore, we're trying to show who we are through our personality. And if you're watching these YouTubers, they had like figurines or things that they were interested in, Star Wars things. And so part of, I think, what I was trying to do was create kind of my own persona online so that I could represent myself.
It's true that we really need to reflect on how we're presenting ourselves to our learners in online settings. We can use our backgrounds, real or fake, to help create that authenticity we mentioned earlier.
And this idea of the simulacrum of the real world is really interesting to me because, on one hand, we are just kind of trying to make our online classrooms more like real life. And on the other hand, sometimes we need to think of online learning as its own separate thing.
Right, a simulacrum, but with key differences. The way we go about structuring activities and assessments is different. And focusing on creating connection, it's easier for certain students to fall through the cracks online, to gloss over relationships. So we really have to be intentional about making space for rapport building.
Bob told us about a few podcast episodes from Cult of Pedagogy that really got him
I
thinking.
started listening to Jennifer Gonzalez's Cult of Pedagogy. One of them was about, creating these genuine online connections. And so listening to her, being able to figure out like, how can I really make a connection in the classroom online? I started really digging into, I think, slowing down. So part of it was that I did start doing Padlets in the class, having students write so that, we could slow down. So the student that was like, oh, call me becomes the person that also has to just kind of sit with their thoughts, really reflect on their ideas. And so kind of promoting slowing down, designing my classroom around that idea is like having students all be able to practice, having them all be able to interact, whether it was on the Padlet where they could all read what they were saying. It was difficult at first, but something that I've been doing in like all of my online classes was going down my roster of students, calling on them, letting them know that they can turn on their mics or they could chat in the chat box if they were really busy, or coming back to them. But I asked each student like a question of the day, whether it was like what their gratitude was, something about the grammar point, what did you do yesterday, or what have you been doing for a long time that you want to share with us? And 20 something students, I would go down and I realized it would take me 30 minutes sometimes, because they wanted to share. And I had a lot of freedom at that time. So we kind of dug into different things. So mental health, talking about the environment, talking about things that young people are really interested in. And part of being a digital teacher is, I think, really figuring out what students are really interested in. And so part of it was teach me about what's going on in the world. Like, how is your world? What are things that inspire you to want to come to class? We used games like Hot Seat, one student's in the hot seat, they all ask him questions. We did this in the classroom, and then I was able to figure out how to do this with Zoom, right? Like breakout rooms, random group of 4. I would always make them like who the first person was, like based on who's the oldest, who has the most siblings, who has the smallest shoes, something where they had to interact first before they could go. And I remember students saying like, I love that game. I get to know my classmates, like I get to ask them all these questions and they get to ask me questions in English. And so I think that, yeah, as teachers, whether it's in person or online, we need to create ways that students can get to know each other, learn about shared interests, and even things about vulnerability, being able to figure out like, who you can connect to and talk about certain things because of some of the things that we talk about in the classroom that they have to practice in English.
I really appreciate that Bob is talking not just about using technology to create connection, like Padlet, but also about things as simple as doing a warm up and making sure every student talks, or doing a hot seat activity that's focused on relationship building in addition to speaking practice.
Right. Focus is creating genuine online connections for everyone. There's this element of inclusivity in what he's saying, right? He wants the introverts in his class to have space to speak. And that's really where the technology came in for him.
Right. Padlet, such a wonderful, versatile tool. He used it mainly to make sure that there were opportunities for interaction for everyone, especially those who might have felt too shy to speak.
And these asynchronous tools really do provide more opportunities for interaction, especially in larger classes. Let's hear about some of Bob's other go-to tools.
I loved using Mentimeter, the word clouds. It felt like a mood board, you know. I think a lot of times we think about word clouds as just like vocabulary list. But when you ask questions like, how are you? What are all the emotions that you can think of and feeling at the moment? You know, you start to kind of. And I think the really nice thing about the word cloud is how it makes one word bigger because more people are feeling this. So you're reading the temperature of the room,
And that
you know, and
informs
which
your
ones are
instructions so much, right?
right.
You need to understand how they're feeling. And that ties in nicely to what you mentioned, checking in with every student, you know, taking 30 minutes for a warm up. I think teachers are often afraid to do that. They think a warm up should be quick, it's 5 minutes. But I think that there's a lot lost when you don't take the time to check in with individual
I think
students.
so too.
Slow down. Yeah.
And I'm going to say it's not possible in every classroom. If I have 60 students in a class or something, 45, that's not going to be possible. But, you know, I think Padlet and Mentimeter lets you do this quickly, you know. And I'm always about making it anonymous. If they want to put their names, great, you know, but like if you don't want to share, but you want to write, because I think, you know, putting word to the world makes it real, you know.
I've taught 300 students online from here, but in China at once. And so, this idea of having a large classroom and thinking like you don't really have time to check in with your students, but I would use like those memes where like there are different cats, like cat moods, you know, and
Which
they
cat
have to
are you?
select like which cat they are. And they really like, there, a lot of people are afraid of cats in China, but like many
Oh,
of
wow.
them love them and use them as their avatars. So they really would connect to that. And it's just an example of like, no
cool.
matter how large your class is, there is still, you know, a chance for you to sort of embed that sort of human touch and show your
Right.
students that you care about how they're feeling. And that's going to help you decide how to, you know, work with them for that session. I think that's really, that's
Right.
smart. Yeah.
The other episode of Jennifer Gonzalez's Code of Pedagogy was about creating screencast. And so part of it was that I really wanted to dig into how do I make this video where I can just informally share with my students the homework assignment, you know, and just tell them what's going on in the world. I use loom.com, Loom. It's a great screen recording tool. As an educator, you can get a free account if you have your ID and an EDU. And what it allowed students to do was, one, I didn't have to put it onto YouTube, but the really nice thing was the interactions. You know, we're talking about online interactions. The students could put like an emoji at a certain spot. If there was something funny, they would all put the laugh emoji. You can write a comment and it shows where they write the comment. In the past, you would have to answer everybody's question individually. I think in a certain way, this kind of saves us the time and energy. I didn't have many students ask me questions about the assignment. You know, I didn't have to say it 20,000 times.
Interesting.
I
They
just said
could
it
just
once.
listen over and over.
And a lot of it was like not being perfect. If there was like the cat screaming in the back or somebody opens the door, you know, and somebody walks behind, but just leaving in the imperfections. Like part of it is I look back at videos from those, you know, 5 years ago and I realized, wow, that looked bad.
Well, we were all beginners 5 years
Yeah.
ago. Yeah.
Right. But you know, you look at anybody that's been doing this, any YouTubers that started 10 years ago, their videos were like filmed on camcorders and they still keep those around, you know? So it is about this imperfect journey. And we can be professional as we want and we can represent ourselves in a certain way. But I think part of it, the authentic part, is that we leave in those imperfections. You know, my imperfections help my students to go through this imperfect step of learning a language. You know, and the idea of like, I'm going to get this perfect, it's going to get better, but you know, we're all working on this.
I love this idea of leaving imperfections in our work.
Mm-hmm.
It's hard for us perfectionists for sure. But, you know, showing that human side is really key.
Absolutely. And when talking about these tools, I always go back to this idea that the pedagogical goal needs to drive the use of tools. The tools shouldn't drive how we design a lesson or activity. We talked a little more about this on episode 24 on using social media for language learning.
The idea here is that the tool is serving the objective of community building rather than using the tool for the sake of using the tool, and community kind of being an unintended offshoot of that.
So far, Bob's touched on some core tech tools he's used to create authentic engagement online. And I think this last tool he shared with us really gets at the heart of that. Let's hear about
To
GatherTown.
describe Gathertown, it's basically like an old school Japanese RPG. So it's like Final Fantasy. You have these little characters, and you're one of these little avatars, and you move on a two-dimensional field where you can interact with people. And I thought one of the greatest things was that it allowed people to walk together, and once you came close, like around 6 spaces, you could start to hear them faintly, and you could see like a blurry picture of them. And as you got closer, you were in a, I would call it a breakout room with them. So it created this proximity, and you can like choose your character, what the character looked like. As a teacher, I could design the space so it could look like a classroom. It could look like a spaceship. It could look like a dungeon. And so that was something that people were using during the pandemic to create these online conferences. And so I created the space, and I actually asked 2 of my students to help me design the classroom. And I just said, hey, I need 2 students that want to come in. I'll show you how to create and design the space. I want it to like be personalized for you. They added like a playground in the back. There was like an extra room. They started adding portals. So like you walk into the space, it would magically make you go to another spot so you can teleport back into the classroom. I was designing this. I was prepping this all night. I come in around like I think 11 p.m. my time, which I think was a little earlier for my Turkish students, but I see a group of them. There's like 6 of them just kind of gathered around each other. And I don't know what they're doing because I'm not near them. So I slowly walk up to them, and then I could hear them. And there's a guitar playing. One of the students is playing guitar for everybody. And I said, hey guys, it's a little early for class. And they were like, we're just hanging out. And I
Yeah.
said, oh, okay. What are you talking about? They're just like, we're getting to know each other. And I
Oh,
had that
lovely.
moment where I just was like, "Ah, I wish I had learned about this like so much longer ago. I wish that I had had this opportunity to give you this space, this digital hallway, which was the idea that, you know, I'm interacting with them in the physical classroom, but it's all the spaces outside. When I walk into R1 at Chukurova University, I would see all my students gathered outside talking, flirting, doing what young people do in college. And I would always walk by and hear them, but I didn't want to interact with them and ruin the moment. I would just walk into my space and go back into my classroom, control my class. But yeah, that idea that after class, where can the students go if we can't actually meet each other in class? And, you know, they could create WhatsApp groups or things like that. But, this idea of like just getting together and being able to see each other and hear each other and talk about their hobbies and all of those things, it blew me away. And so when I came to class the next day, they were ready. They knew how to use this platform called Gather, which was a great platform. Now it's limited to just 10 users. So, I mean, you could do like
Oh, boo.
office hours. You can maybe do smaller class settings there.
Hmm. That's interesting. I mean, I love this idea of the platform, and I have seen it. You mentioned gaming earlier. It really ties into that so
Right.
much because it's kind of a gamification of the entire classroom experience,
Right.
right?
Yeah.
So I really love that that was kind of your way of recreating that hallway in a digital space, right? A place
Hmm.
for them to get together, even if you weren't there. They just started using that space to connect
Right.
with
Yeah,
one another. Yeah.
because it was open. Anybody could just come. If I was 5 minutes late, the students would be in class waiting for me, and maybe there would be
Hmm.
more interactions. But I'd made some spaces that were really interesting because I had like 2 spaces next to each other that nobody could hear except for those 2 people. So it was kind of like, that, hey, they're talking to each other. What are they talking about? Like I would like to know, but you can't. I couldn't even try to like eavesdrop because they were
Hmm.
in this one-on-one talking space. I don't think Zoom allows you to have that flexibility for the students. I think teachers, we can create these breakout rooms and force them into things, but just like kind of organically collecting and, connecting, I think that was great.
Mhm.
Hmm.
One of the challenges with the pre-orchestrated Zoom rooms, we put them in breakout rooms, they're talking, but then if teachers come in and they're like, you want to be a fly on the wall, but you
Quiet.
can't, they like just shut off. And so it
Right.
stops becoming authentic sharing, right? When they
Right.
know that they're being watched. So it's really incredible what you've done with Gather. I've attended conferences using it, and I thought it was really special. I liked that
Yeah.
no one could see me. I liked that I was just an avatar. That was fun.
Right.
I imagine that it helps with students who are maybe lacking the confidence to turn their cameras on, maybe, or
Yeah.
feeling shy, those introverted students, like you mentioned.
Yeah, so I think that, when I was teaching, I realized that my students that were the introverted students from that year were now my more successful students. They had those autonomous learning strategies. They were able to focus. They didn't have the nervousness, the anxiety of being in a classroom and having people hear what they say.
Well, and also, I mean, they are building rapport among
Mhm.
themselves, right? And
Right.
so I think that's kind of the big plus because once they get to class, they already know each other. They already feel comfortable
Right.
talking to each other, and they know that you're giving them permission to, be authentic with each other. So,
Right.
yeah.
I love this idea of the digital hallway, this liminal space outside of class where students interact organically. Even if we're not using a video game style app like Gather, we can look for ways to let students congregate more naturally.
Right. Like opening our Zoom room ahead of time so they can chit chat a little before the teacher logs on, or maybe setting them up with a chat group on WhatsApp, Slack, or Discord.
I also thought that it was smart that Bob asked students to design the Gather space.
Hmm.
Giving learners agency is a great way to build rapport.
It is. And
Hmm.
it's also a good way to lighten the teacher workload a little, right?
Yeah.
Constructing these kinds of learning experiences takes a lot of time.
And that's something that Bob acknowledged.
Creating these online interactions, creating like genuine connections with students, it takes a lot of work. Just like if you
Hmm.
imagine with your favorite students, you sit down with them, they are the ones that come to your office hours.
I'm 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 trying not to get all like worked up over here because Bob, you've brought up so many points that I need to consider. I'm teaching, I do TEFL certification
Yeah.
programs, and so I'm working with a bunch of trainee teachers. And when you say like the teacher needs to show up, I'm like, okay, I need to respond more to discussion posts. I need to give more feedback. You can always do more, I think.
Hmm.
Oh, yeah.
What are the parameters? What are the expectations when you're
Right. It's a
creating this
lot of
sort of
work.
digital space? It's a lot of work.
I guess the last thing I want to say is that when we went online, I realized that all of those things that we learned in TESOL and in our master's programs about pedagogy,
Mm,
about how to like effectively teach language, online required that. You couldn't do the normal lecture, the
mm,
grammar translation method anymore because a
mm,
student could just watch a YouTube video. So what was the point?
mm,
All of the things that we were doing online were the best practices in our
mhm,
field. Everything that we
mhm.
learn about in professional development when we go to TESOL international conventions, you had to apply those if you wanted to get the most out of this learning experience. And really, what's been amazing now is that I've taken all of this back into the regular classroom. I'm recording my classes on my computer so I can share it on my YouTube channel, which goes onto the Canvas. I'm posting all the assignments. I'm doing all the Padlets and the Mentimeters in the class, and it works even better in person.
I agree that in reflecting on what we learned during the pandemic, figuring out how to make our teaching engaging in an online setting, recreating the real world online, we actually figured out how to enhance our teaching in the analog world.
Mhm. And I think it's fascinating that we use the term analog to clarify that the world we're talking about is the physical world we live in,
Hmm.
not the online world. Because online life has become so integral to the way we live and also the way we teach. Many teachers are still online, and many teachers are back in the analog classroom.
Hmm.
But we haven't just abandoned what we learned from shifting into online teaching. We're enhancing our practice, carrying our new skill set forward.
So, listeners, we want to hear from you.
Mm.
What strategies have you learned over the years to build rapport in your classroom? How did teaching online enhance your practice? And what strategies have you brought back with you to the analog classroom?
Mm. Many thanks to Bob for sharing his experience and ideas with us today. We hope it sparked reflection and gave you some tidbits of ideas to bring back to your classrooms.
If you found this episode helpful or inspiring, please share it with a friend or colleague, or leave us a review wherever you get your podcasts.
And if you're feeling generous, you can even support the show by buying us a coffee at buymeacoffee.com/thinkaloudpod.
Thanks so much for joining us today on the Teacher Think-Aloud podcast. Until next time, happy teaching
and happy reflecting.